Captain Adam Reyes stepped off the shuttle and onto the polished floor of Stellar Corp Station. With a feeling of unease he couldn't shake, the station was massive, towering above him. Like a city in space, its walls glimmered with a cold, metallic sheen, and everything seemed too perfect, too clinical. Even the air smelled different, thick with the hum of technology. He adjusted his jacket and scanned the crowd of varied species moving in precise lines. He wasn't here for a tour, but for a business transaction. A standard meeting with the higher-ups to discuss resources, but something in the air felt off. It was the kind of place that made a man like Adam wonder if he was just another cog in a machine that didn't care if he existed. He didn't have time for that thought, though. He had a schedule to follow, so he straightened his posture and walked with purpose, heading toward the reception desk. The large, open area ahead of him was filled with beings of all shapes and sizes, none of them human, not even clothes. Their bodies were made of strange shapes, covered in luminescent skin or plated exoskeletons. Some floated while others had multiple arms or eyes. It was a dizzying mix of alien life forms. Adam kept his focus, but his eyes caught one alien figure at the reception desk. She was tall and thin, her skin a glowing shade of teal, and her limbs moved in smooth arcs, like a dancer weaving through air. She had antennae that twitched as if she were listening to something beyond human understanding. She smiled when she saw him approach, and for a moment Adam felt a weird shift in the air. Something about her presence felt different, not in a dangerous way, but in a way that suggested she was part of something more complex than anything he had encountered. She spoke to him in a language he didn't understand. Her voice was soft, but firm, like the sound of wind across water. It was soothing and strange at the same time, but Adam had been in enough intergalactic negotiations to know what to do next. He offered her his name and showed her the paperwork he had to sign for his meeting. She took the documents in 4 long fingers, and her eyes glowed softly as she processed them without looking at a screen. Adam wondered how the technology worked, but he didn't have time to dwell on it. She handed him a small tablet and pointed to a spot where he was supposed to sign. He noticed the small symbols on the tablet and tried to follow her pointing gestures, hoping to make sense of the process, but he didn't know if he was doing it right. She was moving with such fluidity that he felt awkward standing there trying to mimic her gestures. After a few moments he realized it wasn't working. He shifted his stance and did his best to mirror her movements, still unsure of what exactly she was trying to convey. It felt more like a dance than a transaction. His feet shuffled clumsily, and his hands followed the rhythm of her motions, unsure if he was getting it right. But before he could speak, she paused, and their eyes met for a brief second. Her antennas twitched, and a strange feeling washed over him, as though her entire being had shifted with his movements. Suddenly, the air felt charged with something invisible between them. The receptionist blinked. Her eyes widened for a moment before she spoke again, her voice a little sharper this time, but still gentle. The air around them buzzed with energy. Adam stood still for a moment, unsure of what to do next. The receptionist's gaze lingered on him, her antennae twitching in rapid succession. There was a strange intensity in the air that made his skin prickle. He waited for her to say something, to explain why she had stopped. But instead, she blinked again, this time more slowly, and her multiple limbs shifted ever so slightly, her body language expressing something Adam couldn't quite decipher. He fumbled with the tablet in his hand, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. His awkwardness had always been a part of him, but now it felt amplified in the presence of this alien woman who seemed to be studying him as much as he was trying to understand her. He glanced down at the tablet, seeing her gesture again. It looked like she wanted him to repeat the motion, to sign again or perform some action in sync with her movements. He didn't know why, but something in his gut told him that if he followed her lead perfectly, everything would be fine. But there was a catch, wasn't there? He couldn't quite grasp the sequence of steps, the subtle differences in how her limbs moved and how her whole body seemed to flow with purpose. What felt like a simple task quickly transformed into a puzzle too complex to solve. And that's when Adam did something he immediately regretted. He shifted his body in a way that felt similar to the rhythm she had set. He raised his arm awkwardly to mirror her position. extending his hand out in what could only be described as a strange, offbeat imitation of some kind of dance step. He tried to match the timing, to copy her fluid gestures. The moment his fingers began to follow her delicate movements, he felt an unexpected pull, a pressure in the air that made him stumble, almost as if the room itself had shifted with his actions. He quickly realized his mistake, but it was too late. The receptionist's eyes widened, and a low hum filled the space. The buzzing sound that had seemed so distant a moment ago intensified, escalating in pitch and urgency. Adam, still trying to play it off like he hadn't just stepped into a cultural minefield, looked around nervously. He noticed the subtle shifts around him. The air crackling, the flicker of lights overhead, the way the receptionist's posture stiffened. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. He had done something wrong. Before Adam could explain himself, the receptionist's form tensed, and she moved with unexpected speed. Her multiple limbs seemed to blur into a coordinated sequence of movements. Without a word, she turned abruptly toward a control panel hidden beside the desk and began typing something in a rapid sequence. Her fingers danced over the screen, the symbols flashing too fast for Adam to keep up with. But one thing became clear: something was happening. The room was responding, reacting. The metallic walls began to hum, and a soft yet insistent series of alarms rang out across the station. Adam took a step back, glancing around the now locked-down lobby. Red lights began flashing in sync with the alarms, and strange symbols appeared on the nearby walls, seemingly in response to the actions that had just transpired. The receptionist, clearly unsettled, glanced over her shoulder at him. Her antennae flicked back and forth, the tips glowing faintly as if in warning. Adam's stomach churned as he realized that his clumsy attempt to mirror her had triggered something much more than an awkward moment. It had triggered a security system. Before he could say anything, she turned back to him with a sharp, urgent look in her eyes. Her voice, when it came, was no longer soft, but firm, her tone laced with something that felt almost like panic. Her words were unintelligible to him, a rapid string of sounds he couldn't understand. Still, one thing was clear. He had done something monumental. And now, they were both trapped in it. Adam stood frozen, his heart racing. The receptionist, now clearly flustered, moved with urgency, her long limbs flicking and dancing over the control panel in a flurry of quick, precise movements. Her previous grace had turned into a frantic energy, a stark contrast to the calm demeanor she'd first shown. Adam could only watch as the alarms blared louder, their echo reverberating through the vast expanse of the station. Red lights flashed around them, casting strange shadows that twisted the once straight lines of the station into an unrecognizable labyrinth of panic. "Wait," Adam shouted, his voice lost in the chaos. "What's going on? What did I do?" The receptionist's antennae twitched once more, a brief flicker of something that could have been a glance of reassurance, but it was gone as quickly as it came. She wasn't listening to him, not in the way he hoped, anyway. Instead, she continued to work at the panel, her movements faster now, more erratic. Her multiple limbs seemed to blend into one flowing motion, almost too fast for Adam to follow. The screen before her blinked, showing strange symbols and unfamiliar codes that he didn't understand. But then, suddenly, a burst of static cut through the air. The entire station flickered, a low rumble vibrating the floor beneath him, as if the entire structure were trembling in response to some hidden force. The receptionist froze mid-movement. Her glowing eyes darted to the screen, then back to Adam, her expression unreadable for a split second. It was then that Adam realized something. A deep, almost instinctual feeling hit him like a sudden gust of wind. This wasn't just a simple mistake. His awkward dance, his misunderstood gestures, they had set off something far more significant than a simple system malfunction. He hadn't just triggered a security system. He had stumbled upon something much deeper, much darker, hidden beneath the polished surface of the station. The receptionist stepped away from the panel, her expression now harder, more guarded. Her once flowing posture was stiff and tense as she faced Adam. Without warning, she gestured for him to follow her, moving swiftly down a corridor that Adam hadn't noticed before. The station felt enormous, labyrinthine, a sprawling structure designed with far more secrets than he'd ever been told. He had no choice but to obey, too curious to do anything else, but a sinking feeling settled in his gut as he followed her down the dimly lit hallway. They passed several doors, some locked, some with strange symbols marking them. Symbols that seemed almost alive, like they were pulsing with some unknown energy. The receptionist didn't speak. The silence between them grew heavier with every step, and Adam began to feel the weight of his actions pressing down on him like a vice. Finally, they arrived at a large, sealed door, unlike the others they had passed. It was made of some dark, polished material, etched with even more cryptic symbols. The receptionist paused before the door and turned to face Adam. Her gaze softened just a fraction. "You shouldn't have done that," she said, her voice now softer but still laced with something he couldn't place. A hint of fear, perhaps. She didn't wait for him to respond. Instead, she raised one of her arms, placing a slender hand against the door's surface. The symbols shimmered briefly before the door began to hum and slowly slide open. Adam's pulse quickened. What was behind this door? What had he uncovered with his clumsy misstep? He tried to form a question, but the words caught in his throat. The receptionist didn't give him the chance to speak. She entered the room, motioning for him to follow. Inside, the air was thick, oppressive. The room was vast, filled with rows of computers, holographic displays, and large metallic tanks that seemed to pulse with an unnatural glow. But the most striking feature was the large, circular platform in the center of the room. It was surrounded by intricate machinery, its surface glowing faintly. Adam stepped forward, drawn to the center of it, where a strange hum seemed to emanate from below. "Stellar Corp is not what it seems," the receptionist said, her voice low, almost a whisper now. "And neither are we. This is where the truth begins." Adam felt a chill creep up his spine as he realized that the path ahead would be far more dangerous than he'd ever anticipated. The spark he had unintentionally ignited was about to reveal secrets that could change everything. And for the first time, Adam realized that he wasn't just a bystander in this story. He was part of something much bigger. Adam stood still, processing the sheer magnitude of what was unfolding around him. The room felt like something out of a science fiction nightmare, with its shimmering tanks and humming machines. The receptionist, Clara, he now knew, moved quickly, her four limbs working in perfect synchronization as she activated a series of holoscreens around the room. They flickered to life, revealing strange symbols and incomprehensible data flowing across them at a speed too fast for him to follow. She glanced back at him, her eyes betraying a mix of resolve and uncertainty. "Do you understand what you've done?" she asked, her voice steady despite the palpable tension in the air. Adam opened his mouth, but the words didn't come. He was still reeling from everything he'd witnessed. His initial, innocent mistake had triggered something far more dangerous than he could have imagined. The systems were failing, the alarms were still blaring across the station, and he was caught in the heart of it. It was clear now that the station wasn't just a neutral hub for intergalactic trade. It was a fortress built on secrets, manipulation, and control. And Lara, for reasons he didn't fully understand, had decided to let him in on those secrets. "I didn't mean to do any of this," Adam said, his voice strained. "I was just trying to fill out a form." Lara looked at him for a long moment, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly as if weighing his words. She motioned toward one of the glowing tanks. Adam noticed that the lights around the tank were flickering in rhythm, almost like a pulse. His curiosity piqued. He took a tentative step closer, but Lara stopped him with a raised arm. "Do not touch that," she said sharply, her voice tinged with something akin to fear. "That tank holds more than just technology. It holds our history, our future." She stepped forward, her multi-limbed body fluid in its movements as she approached one of the holoscreens. The data displayed on it shifted rapidly, images of Sarathian cities and landscapes flashing across the screen. As she tapped a few controls, the image zoomed in on what appeared to be a large, imposing structure surrounded by dense forests and fields. "This is where it began," Tellura said, her voice growing softer, almost reverential. "Stellar Corp didn't come here to help us. They came to dominate us." Adam's mind raced. He had heard rumors of large corporations trying to manipulate entire civilizations for profit, but this was different. The very foundation of this station was built on coercion, and he could feel the weight of the truth settling in around him. Tellura wasn't just an employee. She was part of something much bigger, a resistance that had been waiting for a spark to ignite it. We were once a free people," Tellura continued, her voice tight with emotion. "But the moment Stellar Corp arrived, they saw us as a resource, not a civilization. They used our culture, our very biology, to create systems of control. These tanks," she said, gesturing to the glowing containers around them, "hold the minds of those who dared to resist. They became nothing more than slaves to the machines." Adam's stomach turned. He thought back to the receptionist's initial calm demeanor, how she had moved with such grace and precision. What he didn't know was that every action had been measured, every gesture part of a greater plan to keep the Sarathians under control. The dance-like movements, the subtle postures. Tellura's people had been forced to communicate through a language of submission, their every action monitored, manipulated, and dissected by Stellar Corp. Tellura turned to him, her face hardening with resolve. "You've triggered something, Adam. You've awakened a part of me that I thought was lost. A part of all of us. The dance we've been performing for so long. It's not just a tradition. It's a form of resistance. And you, with your awkwardness, have given us hope." Adam swallowed, his heart pounding in his chest. He was in deeper than he had ever imagined. He had thought this was just a routine mission, a simple negotiation. But now he understood that this was no coincidence. The human spirit, the unpredictable nature of his actions, had done something that the Sarathians had been unable to do for years. It had sparked rebellion. "You're not alone," Adam said, his voice steadying. "I'll help you." Tellura's eyes softened, and for the first time, she smiled, not with the practiced politeness of a receptionist, but with something real, something raw. "We'll need more than just your help, Adam. We'll need everything you have. Everything." As the alarms continued to blare in the background, Adam realized that this was only the beginning. The spark had been lit, and now it was up to him, and Tellura, to fan the flames of rebellion. Adam's heart raced as Tellura's words echoed in his mind. "We'll need everything you have." There was no backing out now. The discovery of what Stellar Corp had done to the Sarathian people, the manipulation, the control, it was too much for Adam to ignore. But what could he possibly offer them? A clumsy human who had accidentally triggered a security breach, who had fumbled through a dance of resistance without even knowing it. He had never been the type to get involved in something so much larger than himself. He was just a soldier, a negotiator, always the one following orders, not giving them. But something about this felt different. The very air seemed charged with potential, and the Sarathian rebellion was growing, like a fire that had found its fuel. Tellura was right. His actions had sparked something deep inside her people, something they hadn't felt in years. And now, whether he liked it or not, Adam was part of that spark. He was more than just a bystander. He was the catalyst for something bigger than himself. Tellura led him deeper into the heart of the facility, where the real work of the rebellion was taking place. The once sleek, clinical corridors of the station had now become shadowed, filled with hidden doorways and clandestine meetings. Sarathian rebels, previously silent and fearful, were gathering in secret. There was a palpable sense of urgency as the walls seemed to close in around them, the sound of footsteps muffled by the hum of the station's core systems. Adam couldn't help but be struck by the quiet resolve in their eyes, the same quiet desperation that mirrored his own. These were people who had lived under the thumb of oppression for too long, who had been denied their freedom, their culture, their lives. They were ready to fight. "This is where it starts," Tilara said, her voice low but steady as she motioned to the small group of Cerethian leaders gathered around a table covered with maps and data screens. Adam's gaze flicked from one face to another, noting the sharpness in their eyes, the tension in their posture. These were not just rebels. They were leaders, strategists, fighters who had spent years in the shadows, waiting for the right moment. Adam cleared his throat, stepping forward. "So, what's the plan?" The room fell silent, all eyes turning to him. Tilara nodded, motioning to the data screen in the center of the table. "We've spent years gathering information, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Stellar Corp controls every aspect of our society, from our resources to our communications. But what they don't understand is that we have one thing they can't control: our ability to adapt, to change. They thought they could use our culture against us, but they were wrong." Adam's brow furrowed as he looked at the map on the screen. There were dozens of targets marked, supply lines, communications hubs, and the central control room, where Stellar Corp's command staff monitored every movement on the station. It was a daunting list, one that made him feel small, out of his depth. But as he looked around at the faces of the rebels, he realized something. These people were not afraid. They were determined. They had the drive to see this through. And now, with his involvement, they had the spark of something new. "What do you need me to do?" Adam asked, his voice steadier now. Tilara's eyes met his, and for the first time, she allowed herself a small, knowing smile. "We need you to be who you are, Adam. The human who does things without thinking, without following the rules. Your unpredictability is exactly what we need." The other rebels exchanged glances, nodding in agreement. Adam felt a flicker of something within him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. He had been a part of many missions, but this felt different. This was more than just a job. This was about freedom, about changing the balance of power in the galaxy itself. "We're going to hit them where it hurts," Tilara continued. "The heart of Stellar Corp's control is their communication systems. We can cripple their entire infrastructure by taking out their central data hub. If we do that, we can send a message to every Cerathian and every other species they've enslaved." Adam looked over the plan, his mind racing as the pieces began to fall into place. The plan was bold, almost reckless. But in this moment, it felt right. This was his chance, not just to help the Cerathians, but to prove to himself that he wasn't just some pawn in a bigger game. He could be more. "I'm in," Adam said, the words coming out with more confidence than he had expected. "Let's burn this place down." Tilara's eyes shone with something like approval. "That's the spirit." The room erupted in murmurs of agreement as the rebels began to prepare, gathering weapons, tools, and plans. For the first time, Adam felt like he wasn't alone in this fight. The spark had been lit. And now, there was no turning back. The hours flew by as Adam and Tilara worked alongside the Cerathian rebels, finalizing their plans and preparing for the mission ahead. The air in the underground chamber had shifted from tense anticipation to electric excitement. For the first time since Adam had arrived at the station, he could feel the weight of the moment settle into his bones. This wasn't just a raid or a small skirmish. This was the beginning of a revolution. Tilara stood at the center of the group, her movements precise as she directed the others. Adam couldn't help but admire how effortlessly she commanded attention. It wasn't just her physical presence, though that was striking. It was the way she carried herself with purpose, the way her people followed her without question. She was a leader, and in her, Adam saw something he had never fully understood about the Cerathians, their ability to endure, to fight when there seemed to be no hope left. As the final details of their plan came together, Tilara turned to Adam. "You're sure about this?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. "Once we start this, there's no going back. If we're caught, we'll be hunted, and this station will become a prison for us." Adam met her gaze, feeling the gravity of her words. He had never been a stranger to danger, but this was different. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for freedom, for a chance at something better. The stakes had never been higher. "I've come this far," Adam said, his voice steady. "I'm not turning back now. You've got my word." Lara nodded, a glimmer of respect in her eyes. "Good. Then let's make sure we win this." The rebels began to assemble in the hidden passageways beneath the station, their movements quick and calculated. Adam, for all his military experience, couldn't help but feel the weight of his unfamiliarity with the Sirathian methods. Their tactics, their strategies. Everything was different from what he knew. But the one thing that was the same was the sense of urgency that fueled them all. They were fighting for more than just themselves. They were fighting for their entire species. The plan was simple, but dangerous. The first strike would target the central communication hub located deep within the station. Once they took it, they would have the ability to cut off Stellar Corp's control, disrupting their operations and sending a message to every Sirathian, to every species enslaved by the corporation's greed. It was their best chance to cripple Stellar Corp's stranglehold on the station and beyond. Lara led Adam and the rest of the team down a narrow corridor, their footsteps muffled by the thick walls of the station. The station's hum had taken on an eerie quality as they moved deeper into its core, and Adam felt a chill creep down his spine. This place, this monstrosity of metal and technology, was a prison. It wasn't just a station. It was a symbol of everything that had gone wrong in the galaxy. They reached a maintenance hatch hidden behind a large panel. Lara paused, her fingers working quickly to disengage the lock. Adam watched her with a mix of admiration and unease. She wasn't just fast. She was calculated, efficient, a product of years of resistance. When the hatch finally clicked open, Lara turned to him. "This leads to the access tunnel," she whispered. "We're almost there." Adam nodded, his heart hammering in his chest. He could feel the tension building, the weight of what they were about to do. There was no turning back. They were about to hit Stellar Corp where it would hurt the most. Their communications. The entire structure depended on their ability to control information, to manipulate the flow of data. If they could disrupt that, they could disrupt everything. Lara signaled to the rest of the team, and they moved into the access tunnel, the small group moving with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Adam followed closely behind, his mind running through every possible scenario, every potential setback. The Sirathians were experts at this, but there was still so much that could go wrong. They navigated the tunnels, moving with quiet urgency, the soft glow of their helmets cutting through the darkness. The central hub was just ahead, but as they rounded a corner, Adam's breath caught in his throat. A pair of Stellar Corp guards stood between them and the entrance. Lara didn't hesitate. She raised her hand, signaling the team to fall back into the shadows. Adam's pulse raced as the rebels melted into the darkness, their presence almost invisible to the guards. He could hear the guards' muffled conversation, their voices low, unaware of the danger lurking just a few feet away. Lara motioned for Adam to follow her. She moved with such quiet precision that he couldn't help but be amazed at how seamlessly she blended into the shadows. They crept forward, keeping low and silent. As they neared the guards, Adam's fingers tightened around the handle of his blaster. Lara's eyes met his, and she gave a subtle nod. In that moment, Adam understood. The first strike was about to begin, and he would be ready. The tension in the air was thick, suffocating. Adam crouched low beside Lara, his body pressed against the cold metal walls of the tunnel, every muscle taut and ready to spring into action. The two guards ahead of them continued their casual conversation, completely unaware of the impending storm. Their voices were muffled, the sound of their footsteps echoing faintly in the distance. Adam's heart thudded in his chest, every beat a reminder of how high the stakes were. The mission, this strike, was critical. Failure wasn't an option. Tilara's sharp eyes never left the guards. She raised her hand, signaling for Adam to move. He nodded, his pulse racing as he followed her lead. They moved in perfect unison, as if they were a single entity, their footsteps silent on the smooth metal floor. The rest of the rebels were just behind them, waiting for their moment to strike. As they neared the guards, Tilara didn't hesitate. She launched herself forward, swift and silent, her body moving like liquid. Adam, too, surged forward, his training kicking in, but not with the same fluidity. He was more of a blunt instrument, effective, but not as precise. Still, he didn't second-guess himself. He had no choice now but to trust in the mission, in Tilara, and in the Cerethians. Before the guards could even turn around, Tilara was upon one of them, her limbs like lightning, striking with brutal precision. She twisted his arm behind his back and forced him to the ground in one fluid motion. Adam followed suit, his blaster drawn, but Tilara had already neutralized the other guard with a quick, lethal strike to the neck. The guards never had a chance. The rebels surged forward, sweeping into the corridor with a quiet, practiced efficiency. Adam couldn't help but feel a rush of adrenaline as the group moved swiftly toward the central control room. They passed the two unconscious guards without a second glance. There was no time to waste. The mission was all that mattered now. Tilara led the way, her eyes scanning every corner, every shadow, as they approached the entrance to the central hub. The door was locked, of course, but nothing seemed to faze Tilara. She moved quickly to the control panel beside the door, her hands working with remarkable speed as she typed in a sequence of commands. The door hissed open, revealing the dimly lit control room beyond. Adam felt a surge of anticipation. This was it, the moment they'd been waiting for. The central communication hub was the beating heart of Stellar Corp's control over the station. Taking it down would send shockwaves throughout the entire network, cripple the corporation's ability to monitor and manipulate, and send a clear message to anyone who dared stand against the Cerathian rebellion. The rebels moved into the room, their weapons at the ready. The control room was vast, filled with rows of monitors, screens flickering with streams of data and encrypted communications. In the center of the room stood a massive console, its blinking lights indicating the flow of information through the station. The room itself was a marvel of technology, but to Adam, it felt like a ticking bomb, ready to explode at any moment. Tilara quickly moved toward the central console, typing furiously into the system. Her expression was one of complete focus, but Adam could see the tension in her eyes. This was the final stage of their plan, the one that would either make or break everything they'd worked for. If she failed, they would be trapped, caught in the heart of the enemy's stronghold. "Cover me," Tilara muttered, her voice a low hiss of urgency. Adam nodded, his grip tightening on his blaster as he scanned the room for any signs of movement. His eyes flicked between the monitors, the door, the rebels. He could feel the weight of every second, the pressure building as Tilara continued to hack into the system. Sweat trickled down the back of his neck, and for a moment, he felt the cold hand of fear tighten around his chest. They had come so far, and now they were on the verge of something monumental. But if the station's defenses were triggered, they'd be facing far more than just a fight for survival. Suddenly, the lights in the room flickered. A sharp beep sounded from one of the consoles. Adam's heart skipped a beat. "What's happening?" he demanded, his voice tense. Tilara's eyes shot to the screen. "They've detected us," she said, her voice grim. "The security systems are locking down. We don't have much time." As if on cue, the doors to the control room slammed shut with a deafening clang, sealing them in. Adam's blood ran cold. They were trapped. He could hear the distant hum of approaching footsteps. Guards, reinforcements, probably already en route. They had no more time. "Get to the backup terminal," Tilara ordered, her voice now a command. Adam didn't wait. He bolted toward the secondary console at the far side of the room, his blaster at the ready. The rebels followed his lead, rushing to defend their position. The room was about to explode into chaos. The control room had erupted into chaos. Alarms blared, flashing red lights reflected off the walls, and the distant sound of approaching guards grew louder with every passing second. Adam's heart raced as he dashed toward the backup terminal. Lara had been right. They didn't have much time. If they didn't take control of the communication systems now, they'd be caught in a deadly trap. Cover the doors. Lara's voice rang out, sharp and commanding, as she continued to manipulate the central console. I'll finish the override. Adam didn't hesitate. He turned to the rest of the rebels, who were already setting up a perimeter around the room, weapons at the ready. The atmosphere was thick with tension, the air charged with the feeling of impending danger. Adam's hands were clammy, his grip tight on his blaster, but he forced himself to focus. The stakes had never been higher. They were this close, so close to crippling Stellar Corp's control, to sending a message that the Cerethians would no longer live in fear. The hum of the security systems grew louder as the doors to the control room began to rattle. The station's automated defenses were online. Adam could see the faint outline of guards moving through the windows, their dark silhouettes gliding through the hallway just outside. Their movements were quick, coordinated, and it was clear they had been trained for situations like this. They weren't going to make it easy. Just a few more seconds. Lara called out from the console, her fingers a blur as she typed in the final sequence of commands. The screen in front of her flickered as the security systems attempted to fight back, but Lara's skill was unmatched. Adam had seen her in action, and he knew there was no one better suited for this task. If they were going to survive, it was all on her now. The first blast hit the door. It was followed by several more in rapid succession, each one shaking the walls of the room, sending vibrations through the floor. The rebels flinched but held their ground. Adam's pulse pounded in his ears, but he knew better than to flinch. There was no time for hesitation. He aimed his blaster at the door, watching for any sign of movement, ready to fire if the guards breached their position. Almost there, Lara murmured under her breath, her eyes never leaving the console. The data on the screen was running fast now, lines of code cascading as she bypassed the final defenses. The room seemed to hold its breath as the seconds dragged on. Then, just as the door began to buckle under another round of blasts, Lara's voice rang out, triumphant. Got it. The central system shut down with a sudden silence. The room went dark for an instant, the flashing lights vanishing as the station's core systems cut out. Adam could feel the weight of the silence. It was disorienting, but for the first time since this all began, there was a sense of victory in the air. Get to the secondary communications hub, Lara barked. Now. The rebels surged into motion, rushing past Adam, making their way to the backup terminals where the main transmission could be sent. Lara and Adam moved quickly, following them to the next control point. But just as they reached the backup system, a loud explosion shook the station. Adam barely managed to keep his footing as the walls around them cracked, dust and debris falling from the ceiling. They're here, a rebel shouted, his voice panicked. They're pushing through the corridor. Adam felt a surge of adrenaline. There was no time to hesitate. The message had to go out now, before the station's forces could regroup. He turned to Lara, who had already begun working on the terminal. Do it, he urged. Send it. She didn't look up, her hands flying across the controls. It's transmitting, she said, her voice steady. We're sending a message to every Cerethian world, every station. It's time. The rebels stood guard around them, fighting off the incoming guards as the transmission completed. Adam's fingers clenched around his blaster as the door to the backup room blew open, guards pouring in. The firefight was intense, but the rebels were determined, fighting with everything they had. Adam's blaster hummed in his hand as he fired, his every shot landing true. There was no room for error. Suddenly, Tilara's voice broke through the chaos. "It's done," she shouted, her eyes alight with relief. "The message is out. They know we're coming." As the last of the guards fell, the room quieted, but the weight of what they had done hung in the air. They had sent a signal, a spark that would ignite a fire. The Sarathians would no longer be slaves to the corporations that had ruled them for so long. The rebellion had begun. Adam stood, panting, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, he felt hope. He wasn't just a part of the rebellion. He was its catalyst. Tilara turned to him, her eyes filled with gratitude and something else. Something deeper, something he couldn't place. "You did it, Adam. You gave us hope." Adam looked back at her, his heart still racing. "We did it," he corrected. "Together." And as the sound of reinforcements echoed down the hall, they knew that the fight was far from over, but they had won a victory. And now, there was no going back.